when you're in the signing mode. What kinds of stories are you trying to feature? And what do you see, again, when you're surfing the web, that other publications, not just blogs where people decide what to do for themselves, but publications where there's an editor or some sort of editorial control, what do people seem to be assigning because they assume that's what people want to read?
That's a big question. Well, before I answer that, I want to say thank you again to the Jazz Journalists Association for having me do this. It's really, truly an honor to be on anything with Dan Morgenstern, and to be asked to answer meaningful questions in front of all of you good anonymous people out there. I guess we could go to my screen if that's at all helpful. I came up with a few examples. I think the first thing that NPR really has made its name on is storytelling. You get this word fairly often in talking about what NPR does as storytelling. And so when I look around the web, try to keep tabs on things, I look for good stories. I look for good music, of course, and I'm listening to a lot of recordings. But I also look for, things that people, ways to articulate this music. I think that, as we were talking about earlier, the status of jazz in popular culture is not very high, I guess, right now. And so people are looking for avenues into this music. There are a lot of, you want to think that every good musician anyhow, has a story to tell, and it's sort of, I've taken it upon myself to help musicians tell their stories, or at least point out where they are being told. Now, it's not necessarily the story of their life and times, or it's not necessarily the story of that can be told in a review. Sometimes it has to do more with the infrastructural aspects of jazz, or sometimes it has to it takes a different format than a magazine printed piece. Sometimes it's a video, sometimes it's something like that, but sometimes sometimes it fits more into the mold of the web medium, really. A few examples. So what I do to comb through this huge, various and sundry world of even jazz journalism going on today. I mean, there's a lot of things being published. I set up an RSS reader to filter the word jazz, really, and not UK jazz, and filter all these other different blogs which I follow and other sources. Howard Jazz Beyond Jazz is in there, it's a ton of articles, and clearly I haven't read them all, but I try to keep tabs on what looks like an interesting story. I also follow various other sources or feeds online. I use Twitter to keep tabs on what people are talking about, whether my own colleagues or musicians or other commentators or et cetera. Pamela Escalenda is somebody who I've worked with. Hi, Pamela. Apparently she is listening to Dan Morgenstern talk about the early days of jazz journalism on a Jazz Journalists Association webinar. This has gotten very meta very quickly.
I should say that if you people who are watching, remember that chat space is available for you to put your notes into and ask questions. If you can see that chat space, I wish somebody would write something there so they would let me know that this is indeed working, and I don't have to open up my Twitter. I tweaked that. Dan, the reason that I mentioned, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to completely cut you off, Patrick.
No, go ahead.
Dan, I talked about the 60s being the golden era of downbeat stories because the story really became adult stories, it seemed like. And maybe we weren't having the internecine wars between the moldy figs and the beboppers, but there were some substantial stories being told. And this, I mean, I know when I was much younger and people would say, well, tell the story. I would always say, well, what is the story? And how did you think about stories when you were editing Downbeat then? And what kind of stories do you see as being exciting now?
What?
Well, there are personal stories. They're very important. There are the personal stories of the musicians. There are news-slanted stories. Of course, you know, this was also, in a sense, well, the festival genre was still fairly new, so you wanted to do that.
You have to re-record this in real time.
Probably for supplementary. And
it's just water?
to also
I'm using it for weights.
find some lively discussion topics and controversy also. It didn't necessarily want to instigate anything, but you know, controversial topics arise sort of naturally in any art form, and that was, you know, some of the fun that we had. We still have today, I think, especially Jazz Times has a lot of columns. Columns are personal opinion things. And those are, I think, significant elements in jazz journalism. And then, of course, although that isn't perhaps a kind of storyline, but reviews both of live performances and especially of recordings, you know, that is very, very important. And even today, you know, you keep hearing about the demise of the CD and all that. Okay, there are so many self-produced CDs these days, and you can hardly go to a performance in a club and not see, you know, CDs for sale afterwards. And this is very much a lively marketplace, and as you can see in magazines like the Free New York thing, which just changed its name, whatever it's called now.
Jazz Record.
Loaded, yeah, that's right, Jazz Record, which is loaded with record reviews. So it's, I think it's far from a dead issue as far as CDs go. But anyway, I mean, in the 60s, of course, we had stuff that lent itself to news coverage of a special kind, and that was something like, you know, the attack by the Jazz and People's movement on the television shows. I don't know if you got to mostly have young people out there, but that was when a group of musician activists would sit in on various, Sullivan and Carson and what's his name? The other.
Cabot.
Oh, yeah.
Cabot.
Yeah, right.
We should mention also, somebody asked me what a moldy fig was. And the moldy figs were people who were interested in very traditional jazz. Funk Johnson had been rediscovered in the late 40s, purportedly the musician prior to... Go ahead, I'm sorry.
The moldy fig name, which was a kind of tag put on traditional jazz fans, fans of traditional jazz, came out of a letter written to Metronome, where a reader referred to the fans of, Sidney Bechet and Fiore and so on as moldy figs. And then that was adopted by the moldy figs as a badge of honor.
This sort of...
Nobody really came up with a similar designation for beboppers, that beboppers in and of itself is not a slur,
These kinds of linguistic jobs continue today when we've got people like Nick Payton suggesting that we should dump the word jazz and go to BAM, the black art music and stuff like that. I don't think we should get in that in detail tonight, but the things that you're bringing up, there are reviews, there are feature stories that are about something that's happening, whether it's a festival or a movement, of a protest movement. There are profiles of musicians. There are columns in which people can really offer their own opinions, usually with some sort of newsy hook. And these subgenres in jazz journalism seem to continue today, it seems to me.
Yes, yes. I think one thing that I miss in the established jazz magazines today, like I don't even see in Jazz Times recently, I don't even see a letters column, and Downbeat has this, like maybe 2/3 of a page of very short letters. Letters from readers, to me that was a very important component of the magazine, and we had some pretty lively things going on there. Letters from musicians and stuff, people, and things that sometimes would go on through 3 or 4 issues consecutively. Another thing that I think is not being done right these days in magazines is obituaries. Obituaries are very important. Nowadays you get a few lines and maybe a photo, but no real career summary or anything like that, unless it's a major. But obituaries are important. And I think it's ironic that you get better obituaries of jazz musicians in the New York Times than they do in any jazz magazine.
Well, quite a lot of this work has transferred to the web, though, hasn't it? I mean, certainly the interaction, the ideas that get tossed around, and people get kind of excited about them, and you can have that interaction with the audience, with the readership, with the writer, the readership, sometimes the musicians too. This is all happening on the web better than really it ever could in a print magazine.
Right. Yes. The web.
Patrick, do you see a lot of interactivity on NPR Music? You get people who are talking about the things that you're trying to present?
Sure. I think it happens in a lot of different ways. So if you see any one of our concerts, during the concert we'll open up a chat room, for example. This thing will sort of span wider, and this whole window section right here, where there right now seems to be some sort of Barnes & Noble ad. That will become a chat space where people can type in questions and sort of interact with the host or producer and sort of talk about what they're doing and sort of shout out what they're talking about. Of course, one of the great things that you can do with a concert with online media is to have comments, and comments allow people, that's not a great example, but sometimes great discussions go on in comments. And you can also start discussions or pick up on discussions that are going on elsewhere on the web. So if somebody reads something interesting on NPR Music, or read something elsewhere, it's very easy for me to take that and sort of excerpt a paragraph or two and further the discussion. Recently, there was a discussion on a BlogSupreme I guess was started by somebody else, a pianist, who also blogs, named Kurt Ironberger. And he was lamenting that jazz education had not really increased the jazz audience, the uptick in jazz education in the last 30 years, say. And that became a much bigger discussion than that alone, but that's what started it, by simply me responding to him, and he offered to write us a story as well. So I think that's one of the sort of interactive things that we can offer. Also, being on social media, being on Facebook, NPR Jazz is on Facebook, and at BlogSupreme is on Twitter. You can sort of respond to people and have conversations. A while ago, we asked people to talk about their first Miles Davis recording with the hashtag #FirstMiles, and eventually we compiled that data into a blog post and got some good stories and quotes out of it too. Just talking about people's emotional connections or personal histories with music.
Is this all journalism? Are we going to consider all of this journalism? And how are we going to distinguish between what is professional, or at least professional level, even though you may not be getting paid, from just kind of random chatter? Is it important to be accurate? Is it important to verify? Is there a premium on research? Is that a prestigious thing to do? Do you want to know what's going on? Or are we content with information just kind of flowing back and forth without being checked, edited? And also, people, if you want to start asking questions to the guests, please start doing that in the chat area now. But again, for any of the panelists, how are we going to distinguish between what is going to be genuine jazz journalism, something that's thought through, prepared, offered with some credibility behind it, and sort of the interactive discussion, the opinions, the softer textual writing, or experiential stuff that people can capture on their video, their phone videos, or whatever that kind of stuff is. How do we make this distinction? Is it an important distinction to have? Does it, if we don't have this distinction, does that mean that professional journalism will kind of forget about that continuing, the professional aspect of it? Do we need professional journalism in order to build the jazz audiences?
If that's a continuation of a thought toward me, I think absolutely. I think nothing can replace having being edited and fact-checking and maintaining a level, a standard of professionalism that has been set by places with resources. I mean, that's why I feel so lucky to be where I am. I do think that a lot of this happens at a very local one-on-one level. Whenever somebody is talking to a musician about something, it's incumbent upon them to check and portray them very well. Luckily, I tend to think that a lot of the people who are interested in covering jazz, who would go through this trouble to do music, are willing to take those steps and be very judicious and very smart and flag themselves whenever they see something that isn't quite right. I don't fully know how else to answer that question, but it seems absolutely necessary.
Matt, what's your take on this? Is there a distinction you need to make when you're querying an editor, that demonstrates that you are a professional in some way, that you've got genuine background in understanding jazz and genuine abilities as a writer?
Well, for me,
it's fairly straightforward. The way I do that is they don't normally show clips from what I've written. And I agree totally with Patrick that nothing could ever replace the editing process. If you want to go about doing solid professional journalism, it's indispensable. I think that all this social media is something that you have to pay attention to, though, because there is and it's because it's a component of the interactive, like, route that journalism has gone. It's not that journalism is Twitter, but I think it's being presented through Twitter. It's allowing people to find it quickly, I guess. I'm not sure if I'm expressing that correctly.
One of the questions from the audience was, what skills do I have to acquire in order to pursue jazz journalism today? And my slick answer was going to be all of them. You know, you have to know about Twitter, you have to know about Facebook, you have to have some idea if you can use your little video camera as a note taker, as a interviewing tool. You can't afford to ignore learning how to write. You ought to be able to learn how to be an editor. You should know how to select photographs, if not to take them. You guys agree with me on this? You've got to know how to do everything if you're going to be working in the ecology of jazz journalism today?
Yes. Yes and no. I mean, I think I don't come from any particularly web literate background other than being, you know, a 20-something who grew up with the internet. I think that a lot of what influences me and how I produce things is just following how music journalism happens today. Sort of back and forth, the sort of blogosphere chatter, the big publications that do exist, and sort of following how people talk about music in the online space today. And I think a lot of great ideas can come from that, from more or less stealing how other people present news and information. I mean, not just music journalism, all journalism really. I think that it's a lot. I think it's a lot more complicated than simply, hey, read the internet. But I think these are the sorts of things that I was fortunate enough to be able to have sort of osmoted or sort of picked up in just over time.
Well, do you think that those institutions that we're used to, Jazz Times and Downbeat specifically, are going to be able to sustain themselves as print publications? They don't seem to be making hugely serious moves to expand their web presence.
Somebody else like to answer that? This is Dan.
I don't know if Dan's still online. Dan, are you here? I think not. Well, I mean, we've seen some publications, several publications go down the tubes, and many of the publications that we would hope by this time would be, for instance, paying freelancers still are not doing so, or are doing it at a very, very small rate. And I mean, you know, I'm 2 generations older than Patrick and Matt, and I don't know if I would have been able to do this as long as I have if I had not been able to get paid something like a wage that I could deal with, which today does not seem like it would have been like. just because so many places have dried up, or there's so much expectation that you're going to be doing your work in your own blog that you're not getting paid for?
Yeah, it's hard. I agree. But I guess that's why I personally have branched out into other subjects and using it as a way to become more of a diverse writer while maintaining the focus on jazz journalism at the same time. I think
Go ahead.
I think it's super hard to crack into. I mean, I feel like I'm one of the extremely lucky ones, and I thank my lucky stars every day that I was able to be employed by an organization such as NPR. But I also think there are people who are doing interesting things by just sort of putting themselves out there, and that is leading to other opportunities in which they are at least somewhat able to support themselves. A few examples. I think my screen's still up. You go to the Jazz Session. It's a podcast with this fellow named Jason Crane, who I interviewed. What he's been doing, he's been touring the country on a Greyhound bus talking to jazz musicians, and he crowdsourced the tour. Basically asked people to donate to his tour fund, and he's been able to traverse the eastern United States, go to New Orleans for, I believe, the first time. And you know, he produces 2 podcasts a week, and it seems like there's fairly well received by musicians themselves. I think Destination Out, which is a blog that focuses on free jazz, and especially rare and unreleased free jazz, has done a good job of taking their name and making it into something. And I don't think they're getting paid for it necessarily, but they've been able to create a partnership with FMPU, in which they help sell some of the digital back catalog of FMP, and they've been able to put on concerts, and they have a radio show now on WFMU. And I realized that, you know, this is something this must be, I haven't actually met the 2 folks who do it, but I respect them incredibly much for putting themselves out here as, I think this is more or less a project of labor of love.
Who does that?
2 folks who go by surnames, but live in New York City and are able to put some stuff together. The site is called Destination Out. I think the journalist Angelica Bino, I mean, of course, she benefits from having a number of great connections already to jazz musicians, but she got her start at WBGO, and she just started a blog of her own, and she's been doing great work. Her blog is called Alternate Takes, and one of the great things, or at least I think that's great about it, is that she's able to focus on issues like having to do with the African American perspective in jazz. And as it turns out from reading her blog, a lot of these issues are the things that we're loath to talk about in more mainstream media stories, which leads to some interesting things. And I even asked her to contribute to a BlogSupreme, and hopefully that's a relationship that will continue. And another thing that is great about, and also I should mention that Angelica has been, you know, it's led to other opportunities. She's been able to show people these stories, and to work for Downbeat, I believe, and to publish elsewhere. And there's also, the opportunity to sort of eavesdrop on what musicians are thinking. George Colligan is a pianist who used to be based in New York City, a very good pianist, and is now based in Portland, but he's started this blog to basically, to catch people up on what he's doing, but largely to talk about and host interesting discussions that are going on. And because he is a musician and knows a bunch of other musicians, he's able to talk to people like Jerome Harris, for example, the acoustic bass guitarist and guitarist, or interview other bandmates. You know, he's a member of Jack DeJohnette's band, and has interviewed Jack. So these are all the sorts of things which you can start, or at least show your interest in by doing this work because you care about it so much, which may not lead to other opportunities, but at least it's an avenue to be out there. I think I certainly don't have any solutions to getting more paid employment, but I think this is where some of the most interesting discussion is happening, and I also do think that great content bubbles to the surface no matter where it is, really, and I think that's one of the great and liberating things about the internet, that you don't need to have all sorts of ins right away and integrate yourself with any sort of insular journalists community that may have previously existed. It's as simple as saying, to achieve recognition, you can, tweet or email a link at somebody interesting.
Oh, you mean people don't have to become members of the Jazz Journalists Association to get the
Well, I would never say that.
Do you think? I mean, I'm proud to say, Patrick, that the first time I met you, you came to one of our early Saturday morning conference meetings during an IHA conference here in New York, and so I think you were music director at WKCR at that time, the Columbia radio station, right?
That's right.
So actually, it is possible to get started without having any specific connections to an insular jazz journalist community, but it doesn't hurt to get in on the community.
Oh, absolutely not. I don't mean to imply that at all, in fact. I'm all for journalists meeting each other and sharing skills, because we are all more or less in this together, or we can at least sort of hang and shoot the breeze about what we've been liking and steal each other's ideas.